Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CHP podcast. My name is Ariana Scalfo. I am the Director of Coaching at CHP, and I want to do a quick podcast on all things hybrid nutrition. I got some questions from you guys off the CHP Instagram. I'll do my best to answer those. And in order to answer them, I think a really good place to start would be a foundation. Hybrid training, we talk a lot about the training and how it typically involves some endurance or cardiovascular exercise and some sort of strength training exercise, with the goal being, maybe not possible all the time, but the goal is to progress in both simultaneously. Even if it's a tag game, every now and again, the hope is with hybrid training to progress in both simultaneously without losing progress in one or the other. So something I get a lot of questions about is obviously nutrition, because it's a huge part of recovery. It's a huge part of gaining lean mass. It's a huge part of performance, and it's a huge, huge part of endurance performance. I would say some of the major factors that our CHP clients and hybrid clients experience that I don't want to say they're not served well by popular nutrition advice, but when we have hybrid athletes, you guys are typically doing strength and endurance, which makes you heavier than most endurance athletes, and also doing a lot more activity than a lot of strength athletes. So a lot of nutrition for Gen Pop, for the general population, is very much geared around sort of the ideas from strength training. And a lot of the nutrition advice, a lot of the even food recommendations are always based around, high fiber, high satiety, larger meal sizes, or more frequent meals throughout the day. And there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people encounter issues when they suddenly need to start taking in 300, 400, 500, 600 more calories either per day or every other day because of their training load. And they still try to adhere to those recommendations, or trying to do more of what worked for them while eating less. And also a lot of endurance athlete guidelines are for smaller athletes. There's not much out there for a 260-pound individual running an ultra. There's not much out there for women who are 165 pounds of pure muscle doing, a 100-miler. I don't want to say that there's bad information. It's all good, but it's very difficult to sift through and find something specific enough to solve a lot of the issues that I think hybrid athletes face. I think the biggest thing I would want to stress is, again, a lot of the ways that we teach nutrition, or you see nutrition being taught, is using very simple rules and guidelines to simplify the approach or make the approach sellable. One easy way to create IP, which is intellectual property, is to create a system and then copyright it or trademark it. So in doing so, or in advertising yourself, sometimes there is an emphasis on pain points, or there is an emphasis on certain dietary interventions that set a coach or a method apart from others. It makes it very difficult then, as a nutrition coach myself, when I'm like, they all could work. You might like one more than the other. They might all work during different phases of your life, depending on what your schedule is, what's going on with your environment and your training load. And that's why nutrition is so complicated. That's why I wanted to create this quick little resource for you guys. If anything, just to generate more questions, because that always happens, but also let you know we do nutritional consults at CHP. So if you don't need full-on coaching, you can talk to any of our coaches. Alec is fully vegan and obviously looks like a complete rock star and performs like one. Nicodemus and Jade are plant-based, and I believe at this point vegan. Obviously incredible ultra runners. Anthony coaches bodybuilding, endurance, so his nutrition stuff is just on point. I've coached everything under the sun. Annie as well. We're all capable of sitting down with you for an hour and going over your nutrition. So if you ever have any questions that become very, very, very specific, please know that we offer that service specifically to get you the best answers possible in as little time as possible. So Definitely look for those consultations if you have a ton of questions after this podcast. If not, just look for a post and start commenting. The first thing I want to talk about with hybrid nutrition is the principles for other sports no longer apply in full. They apply a little bit, but I find that when a lot of us come from a strength background and start adding endurance work, or we come from an endurance background and we start adding strength work, there needs to be a lot of flexibility in our nutritional approach. And there needs to be a lot of flexibility in how we then approach meal times, meal timing, even frequency of macronutrients across the day. There can be a lot of confounding factors when you add a new sport, or if you want to start getting super, super jacked and you want to start putting on lean mass while also keeping your running volume up. You just start getting more and more and more and more questions on how to prevent the things you don't want while also simultaneously protecting and or encouraging the adaptations you do want from your training. So with hybrid athletes, something I see pretty often is low energy availability. And I see it a lot in larger athletes. And this applies as well to just larger endurance athletes. You don't have to be a muscle-bound bodybuilder to be over 200 pounds while also trying to run an ultra. It really does change the picture. You need more fuel every single hour. You need more fluids every single hour, and it makes things more difficult. Something I see a lot is under eating during the week and adhering to more of a strict strength training eating schedule. And then on weekends, when they do their longer runs or longer efforts, encountering sort of a binge cycle. So they do this giant push of activity. They come home and then they report overeating like crazy. And what they're overeating is typically not high in protein and, high in carbohydrate and quality nutrients. Often it is high calorie because it's a lot of fats or otherwise, which if you want to be fat adapted is one thing. But in general, what I see the most often is a deficit formed throughout the week by under eating for the amount of work being performed because of a stress about physique. I think that becomes a thing. But then when you hit that long run on the weekend and you've hit it in a small deficit, you create a much larger deficit. The body often just corrects. It autocorrects. It doesn't care what you want. It doesn't care what you want to look like. It's going to make sure it gets those nutrients. So I've seen a lot of what looks like binge restrict cycles in both endurance athletes, especially athletes that are running over 70 miles a week, but also hybrid athletes. I've heard and worked with a lot of athletes that report a loss of self-control, that report feeling like their training is suffering or their recovery is not there, or bonking during their long runs or shorter runs even. And a lot of this comes from inadvertently not fueling enough during the regular work week. They're not eating enough on regular days. They're eating close to enough, but developing a deficit. And then every week to 2 weeks, they have an episode where their body corrects that. And what that ends up looking like in physique could be what they like to call skinny fat, which I hate, but it's true. It's that look where you have more adipose tissue than you would like, even though you're busting your ass. And it's mostly because a lot of those excess calories are not coming in consistently around the bulk of the work. They're just coming in on 1 to 2 days a week. They're mostly fats. They're mostly carbohydrates. The nutrition partitioning that your body's doing on your, long run day and your rest day, it's not the nutrient partitioning that your body is doing on your hypertrophy day. So your body's going to take that incoming nutrition and it's going to be like, well, I definitely need X and Y. I definitely don't have enough protein. So I'm just going to make do. And then the rest of it I'm going to store because I know for a fact I'm going to be put in a deficit again the following week. So you end up with this sort of flat looking physique. And I've even heard from people that after those binge episodes, they feel way stronger and they look jacked. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you actually finally have a glycogen pump in your muscles. But this is probably the most often complaint that I get, and the most common cycle I find hybrid athletes in, is underfueling and then overeating, underfueling and then overeating. An easy way to see if this is happening to you is to just keep a food journal. You don't even have to track, is just keep a food journal that's focused on primarily average intake. So, this could just be a guesstimate. And then thoughts and emotions around food. Do you ever get extremely hungry? Do you get hungry at the same time every day? Do you feel anxiety around food? Do you feel any loss of control around food? Does it happen routinely on the same days every week or after the same workout? And just using that general food journal, which is very simple, you can keep it as a note in your phone, do that for 2 to 3 weeks, and you can start to see if you are actually truly in control of your intake or if your intake is reactive. Because I think that's what I try to talk to people the most, especially athletes. There's no optimal intake. Like, yeah, there is, but if you're miserable, whatever. But the best thing to do, instead of thinking about a dietary approach or some sort of restriction, just think about how would me proactively eating to serve all of my goals, as well as my favorite foods and things that I enjoy, versus reactively solving problems on the fly that I've let occur or let happen, or reacting in a sudden blood sugar low, or reacting when I've restricted myself so long from some food item and then I'm presented with it. How do you switch to a proactive mindset from a reactive mindset? That usually makes the biggest difference, because you're starting to then look at every single intervention as building toward a plan where you were always one step ahead of your own needs, including emotional, and including wanting to eat something delicious, without judging them. You're no longer judging that need in the context of good, bad food or, ideal or optimal. Now it's just, am I proactively meeting all of my own needs? And it becomes very easy then, if you have performance goals, to make that decision where if you only focus on your emotional needs and eat purely donuts, that is a net negative to your performance needs. Not always, but most of the time. So it becomes very easy also to, when you're thinking proactive, no, you're not proactively just feeding the most hedonistic side of yourself. You're proactively protecting all of the hard work you're doing. You're proactively fueling all of the hard work that you're doing. So it becomes a much more holistic mindset around your nutrition. And that's typically where I prefer starting, is looking at the way that you're eating, seeing if there are especially reactive gaps where you find yourself making up for or reacting to, or, oh shit, there's no food in my kitchen and I got to order out, but I'm so tired, I'm just going to go with the easiest option available, which is not the best option available because I can't think of anything different. Could you have proactively had a list on hand that had easy to order takeout that was more in line with what you need nutritionally? Done. Easy. It's not the complete overhaul. It's not going into complete macro tracking. It's just, what's one decision better that I can plan in advance? If you get to that step and you realize that you are either under or overeating, then tracking can be helpful. Food tracking and getting a sense for what your intake is day to day, and week to week. Typically what we see is, again, less during the week, more on the weekends, and then a reactive restriction during the week. I'm going to get back on track. I'm going to gain weight from the weekends. So I'm going to get back on track. I got to eat less. And you see this sort of wave effect. The goal would be to bring everything valuable up, because this also typically lowers the spike on the weekend. You're less hungry. You're less at risk of low control decisions. I call it hollow leg syndrome, or the black hole belly, where all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to eat the entire cabinet. There's no satiety. There's no feeling of fullness. I'm just eating until I feel better. And it's a weird space to get into, because sometimes you can manage to eat quite a bit before you start feeling better, because there's a lag. Even predicting that, even knowing that it's coming, even being like, you know what, every single Friday at this time of day, I tend to have a reactive eating episode. What can I eat for breakfast that can get me ahead? What can I eat the day before that I can experiment and see if it reduces that from happening? The more aware you become of your own behavior and your own actions without judging it, it allows you to make more proactive decisions and more careful decisions in regards to the nutrients you're taking in during the day. I think the most important thing to remember is bodybuilder nutrition is not good hybrid nutrition. It's just not. When you are focusing on performance, a bulk and a cut cycle is not ideal. You basically always want to be in this constant place of a surplus recomposition or baby deficit composition, or a very, very, very quick cut and then jumping right back into some sort of recomposition focused phase. You want to be living at maintenance, isocaloric, or a slight surplus if your goal is performance gains, because what you're looking for is adequate recovery plus getting back to normal, getting back to isocaloric, getting back to homeostasis plus some. If you're feeding your body in a deficit most of the time, it's really difficult to make that happen, especially if you are intermediate and looking to get to that next level. You're going to bring your baseline intake up. Usually I recommend starting by just making sure your protein is sufficient. That increases satiety, it increases meal size, it can increase meal frequency. When you eat the protein, to me, matters a lot less than the total intake during the day. Where you get the protein from, I personally consider protein shakes a food. They're not a supplement to me. Whey protein or a complete vegan protein is a complete food source. Therefore, to me, it is a whole food. Yes, it's in liquid form, but your body doesn't care. So if you're relying on shakes to meet your protein needs for now, it's still better than not meeting them. So bring up protein first, make sure it's sufficient. Some people will say 1 gram per pound of body weight, especially when you become a larger athlete or if you weigh over 180 pounds, that can become very difficult and it can become prohibitive. It's also not as important if you're eating enough carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are protein sparing. Your body will not reach into protein stores to create energy if it has enough from carbohydrates. So you can usually get away with, I want to say maybe 75% of your body weight in grams of protein, but up or down a bit. And it doesn't have to be the same every day. As long as you're consistently within the same range, half body weight in grams, I would say is a minimum. And I've seen people make great progress with that. So again, I'm not saying that that's not okay. The most important thing is if your protein is lower, is taking in enough carbohydrates. So carbohydrates being protein sparing are very important to protect the protein that you're taking in. So if you're eating very high protein and low carb, your body is using some of those proteins for energy, which is why, again, bodybuilder diets, they're not good for athletes. And bodybuilders, yes, they are athletes, but the things that they're asking from themselves, they can take 2 hours in the gym to hit the appropriate amount of volume that they need. If you are trying to do a strength workout and an endurance workout in the same day, and you only have so many hours in the day to work with, and you only have so much time and so much energy, there's a lot fewer sacrifices you can make. Bringing up protein first, bringing up carbohydrates second, especially based on where your protein ends up. Again, with the end goal of being isocaloric, which is maintenance and a little over. Something that helps a lot if you are looking to lose a little bit of body fat, but you don't want to lose any lean mass, that works very well for hybrid athletes that have varied schedules, is feeding your body to best suit the adaptations that will occur from the work you are performing that day. You're doing a strength-focused day that you know will burn fewer calories, but you are trying to build lean mass. then you could make that a higher protein day and lower carb in a small deficit. Then the next day, if it's going to have endurance work, knowing that you will be burning off a lot more glycogen, knowing that you will be using glucose for fuel, make it a higher carb day and a neutral protein day. And using that sort of carb cycling, undulating nutrition, where maybe the cardio days, you're a lot closer to isocaloric, you're a lot closer to maintenance. And then on your weightlifting days, eating more high protein and a little bit in baby deficit. You're always fueling the cardiovascular work that you're doing when you do it, which is very important for those adaptations for full recovery. Keeping carbs close to exercise is just super important for a lot of reasons. Cardiovascular exercise makes your nutrient partitioning better. Having more lean mass makes your nutrient partitioning better, which again is just what your body does with the nutrients when they come in and where it puts them. There's also something that happens during cardiovascular exercise that we've talked about. This even happens during zone 2 and zone 1 if it's for long enough. There's something called a GLUT4 receptor. GLUT4 basically is a non-insulin mediated method of pulling sugar from the bloodstream. So as you are doing low intensity exercise, you are also upregulating your ability to scavenge glucose from the blood, not only glycogen from the muscles, but blood sugar as well, not even using insulin. So this also reduces the Gen Pop bodybuilder stress, which is, oh my God, am I eating too much sugar? Am I having too many carbs? If they're around that bout of exercise, the answer is quite simply no, because you're not even relying purely on insulin to process those nutrients. Obviously, if you have diabetes or you have a health issue or a concern from a doctor, pay attention to your doctor. But for most of us who are healthy and have healthy insulin use, secretion, not even insulin resistance, like in the case of someone with insulin resistance, this is an excellent way to fuel your activity and improve your body's ability to utilize glucose as a fuel source by keeping your carbohydrates as close to exercise, especially cardiovascular exercise, as possible, because you're introducing those nutrients at a time when your body is the most likely to use them efficiently and the way that we'd like it to. I did receive a question about distribution of macronutrients throughout the day and whether or not that's important or if there's anything ideal. Everyone's different. I think the biggest thing that we always forget about is we always talk about macros and we talk about calories and we talk about the food once it's broken down and in our bloodstream and in our muscles. What we don't talk about is the process of it getting broken down. It's very long. Chewing food, swallowing food. You may have a faster esophagus speed than me. What type of food? How long is it in your stomach? Food can be in your stomach from 4 to 6 hours being broken down, depending on what it is and how difficult it is to break down. Does it have sinew? Is it whole protein? Is it a whey shake? It's going to sit in your stomach. From your stomach, it goes into the small intestine, where it sits for another 6 to 10, 11 hours before it even moves to the large intestine. And nothing is absorbed in the stomach, besides like alcohol and I think aspirin. But there's not even any absorption happening until you get to the small intestine. And the same way that you could have different motility in your esophagus than I do, you can also have different motility speeds, peristalsis speeds in your small and large intestine than I do. You may experience constipation. I may experience runner's trots or diarrhea. You may experience feeling overly full with too much fiber. I may experience needing to eat a lot of fiber to feel full or satiated. And it's in those differences that I hesitate to give specific instruction on what is the most ideal, because at all times, if you've eaten within the last 12 hours, you're absorbing some nutrients at all times. You basically have to fast for 24 to 48 full hours for your body to actually be devoid of nutrients sitting in the digestive tract. You're always absorbing something. So to me, it becomes a lot more important to focus on how do you feel? Are you digesting well? Does it affect your performance? When do you feel the best? When you eat a certain way? Do you like a larger breakfast? Do you like to carb load in the morning and drift toward a more high fat protein before bed? Or the opposite? Do you feel drowsy if you have carbohydrates before you train? Like, everyone is so different. I cannot emphasize enough food journaling, because for you, playing with those macronutrient levels could have a lot more to do with digestion and comfort than actually having the nutrients available during exercise. If you want the nutrients available during exercise, you need to be looking 6 hours earlier, or the day before, in all truthfulness. So when it comes to meal timing and food timing, I hesitate to give precise answers, because you could try something that maybe in a laboratory looks the most ideal, but it causes you gastric upset, it hurts your training, or you're hungry. Your body is very different than the person next to you, even insofar as just mechanically what is going on as you're digesting, what foods you like, how well they sit, your perception of hunger, even where you are in your hormonal cycle. If you're a woman, the way that you eat may need to change based on where you are in your cycle. If you're premenopausal, menopausal, again, you may need to change your eating habits, because you may find yourself hungrier or with less tolerance or blood sugar fluctuations. It's a difficult question to answer, because you are not in a lab. And on a cellular level, what you need, as long as you've eaten, let's say within the last 6 hours, as long as you've eaten something with a little bit of carbs, a little bit of fats, and a little bit of protein within the last 6 hours, most of your needs are met. It just depends on you personally. Do you need to eat before you train? Do you need to eat before you go for a run, or else you feel weird? Do you hate to eat before you go run? Everyone's so different. This is such a non-answer. But honestly, what I would recommend is food journaling. Make sure you're getting in enough per day. Make sure that the way that you're spreading that food out across your day is sustainable and comfortable and does not add stress, either gastrointestinally or mentally. And start there. Problem solve from things that you are actively experiencing being negative, and start there, rather than trying to create some sort of optimal picture of dietary intake that's ignoring your number one problem, or creating a new problem that you've never had before. There's a lot of interesting studies too, even with protein intake, that I know we've discussed, where, even as they measure this stuff in the lab, in studies, it's such a, I don't want to say myopic, because it's still really good research and it's still really cool, but your body is so much more complicated than that. And a real human being in real life, who's living a real life schedule with a job, and you can only eat at a certain time, and you can only eat so much, and you have to train at 4:30, because that's when you get out of work at 3, and you have to drive an hour in traffic to get. What is ideal doesn't matter if it doesn't work for you. It doesn't matter. I've seen so many different approaches work for so many different people. And the most important thing has always been, are they enjoying it? Are they comfortable? Are they performing well? And can they do this again tomorrow? Most important things to focus on. So I would just jump back to food journaling. And if you can get me some more information about if you're experiencing a specific kind of problem, if you're experiencing blood sugar lows, or you feel like you're not spreading your carbs out evenly enough, because this is specifically not about protein, or if you find that you're eating fats before exercise and it's slowing down your digestion and you're feeling groggy, that's something a lot more specific that I can work with. Otherwise, I'm never going to give general advice. I'm just not, because it depends. It depends. And it makes every single answer of mine so cop-outy, but it's true. Another thing that I got asked is hybrid athletes and endurance athletes using BCAAs during long runs and events. I'm happy that this is happening. For a while in the strength world, there was this idea that BCAAs are useless. And if you are eating enough protein dietarily, they don't do much. They're very delicious water. There's no need for them. And BCAAs can't get turned into energy, so they're just kind of like chilling. But there's also no negative to taking them. If you are an endurance athlete and you are prioritizing carbohydrates, so let's say you're in the example I gave earlier where you're doing half your body weight in protein because your volume is so high and you are doing so much aerobic work and you need so many carbs and it is so difficult for you to take in more protein than that, BCAAs are not a bad idea. You're just sort of like covering your bases. And in a lot of cases, the BCAAs are an excellent way of making sure that your body has everything that it needs to make as many complete proteins as possible. Vegan athletes as well, vegan endurance athletes, BCAAs are not a bad idea. I mean, if you're eating a lot of incomplete proteins, then yeah, it just makes sense to add that safety net. They are in no way useless for an athlete in that scenario. And someone who struggles to consume large amounts of whole protein, such as chicken, steak, things like that, in a very busy athletic schedule or very busy life, and finds that their protein is routinely lower than, let's say, 75% of body weight, BCAAs are not bad. They might be really useful. Taking them in during exercise, I would say that falls into the same sort of umbrella as taking in carbohydrates during exercise. Even if you don't need them then, you might need them later. It's not a bad idea. Are they going to make or break anything? I mean, probably not. You're not really using much protein during that aerobic activity, but it may help you recover. It may help you recover faster or more completely, and it may help you maintain muscle mass after a long duration endurance event. So I'm pretty pro BCAA, honestly. They're so inexpensive. They're delicious. They flavor your water. I think they're totally fine. I think the whole, anti-BCAA, like, oh, shit, you don't need them, blah, blah, blah. That comes from the high protein crowd. And as we've just discussed, hybrid athletes do not do as well when they are trying to be in the high protein crowd. Just like our athletic endeavors, we kind of have to be in every nutrient crowd. We need a little bit of everything. And sometimes our schedules, our dietary behaviors or preferences, or training schedules dictate that we need to be more carb heavy and carb dominant than protein, especially to protect our protein intake, which means that BCAAs therefore become useful because our protein intake is not sufficient. So yeah, BCAAs can be pretty useful, especially for hybrid and endurance athletes under those specific conditions. They're also, I mean, as far as I know, there's no downside to taking them. And again, I do not consider protein shakes to be a supplement. This is segueing into the next question, which was supplements. Just because this is an easy one. I have a different view on supplements because I'm very, of course I do. I have a very middle of the road opinion. It depends. The first thing I would recommend is getting a blood test done and seeing if you have any current nutritional deficiencies. Do a self-check, make sure that your sleep quality is good, make sure that your protein, your carbohydrates, your fats are all sufficient, and get a hormonal and thyroid panel. That should be step one. Baseline health should be step one. Then you'll know if you need to specifically supplement one big nutrient or one big vitamin or one big thing. The other reason I recommend this is because some of the things mentioned were nootropics, ashwagandha, things like that. I don't think those are negatives. But I think if they are being taken to fix a problem that is being caused by poor sleep quality or high anxiety or some sort of psychological issue that is not being addressed, or insufficient food, or any number of things that could be solved by addressing a big rock first, or a thyroid imbalance, or a hormone imbalance, ashwagandha is not going to fix it. It might make you feel slightly better sometimes, but it's not going to fix the underlying issues. So make sure that there are no underlying issues first. Obviously, if you can afford it, if you can make it happen, places like Quest Labs allow you to cash pay for a lot of tests now. Make sure your baseline health is good first. Address the big rocks, give it some time. And if you still feel like you want to try and see if a supplement makes a difference in your life, especially a nootropic or something like that, go for it. Experiment with doses, experiment with times that you take it. Do your research. Dosages vary based on body weight, based on exactly what kind of effect you're looking for from it and what's in the supplement that you're buying. This could be a very, very long topic, especially about the specific ones mentioned. I come from a background of being very, very critically ill for most of my teenage years, and having had every single nootropic or herb or supplement thrown at me and shoved down my throat, most of which I was either allergic to, or made me feel worse, or did absolutely nothing, because I was not addressing the root cause of all of my dysfunction, my pain, my exhaustion, things like that. And I hate root cause. It's overused. But in my case, it was very, very, very true. And it makes me cautious in recommending people take miracle plants or miracle mushrooms when they haven't covered all of their bases first and checked all of those other boxes. Because, yeah, I think they can definitely add to your quality of life. They can definitely help. Ashwagandha has been proven to help with things like stress. Having lower stress leads to better sleep, which helps with natural testosterone production. None of these things affect you and affect those, especially testosterone levels specifically. They don't actually change your levels, but they affect other things in mood regulation and stress levels and things like sleep quality that allow your body to continue to do the things it's doing naturally better. But the question remains, what if you just addressed your sleep quality without buying a supplement first? If you do that and you're like, I think I studied ashwagandha, go for it. Or if you're taking it and you feel fine, go for it. I personally only take creatine and a boatload of vitamins because of all of my nutrient deficiencies. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of supplementation first approaches. Let me just say that way. Start with the basics and then experiment with one supplement at a time. Take it for as long as it's supposed to be taken to see a result. Sometimes it can take 4 to 6 months. If you notice a positive result before that time, I'm not saying it's invalid, but also know that placebo is a thing. And you may also be doing other lifestyle adjustments, even unknowingly, because you've introduced this new thing. So you think you should be feeling better and you think you should be going to sleep better. Therefore you do, because you're not stressing about it, etc., so on and so forth. Humans are complicated, and I love you guys. The other question I got was training events with race nutrition. The question was, should you always train with race nutrition or only race pace workouts? I think if you're in an off season, it doesn't matter. But if you are training for a specific race that will occur at a specific time, I think the more often you can expose yourself to race conditions, the better, even if you're not doing race pace. That would include waking up at the time you're going to have to wake up on race day, making sure you can get to the bathroom on time, making sure that you have that breakfast, making sure it sits well, making sure that you have the hydration pack you're going to wear and the amount of food, even if it's a shorter run, even if it's a slower run. For multiple reasons, mostly also taking the stress out of race day morning, knowing that those foods will sit well when you need them to, knowing that you will enjoy them. I think the more often you can practice, the better. You can also train your stomach, especially for a longer event. Nothing really happens with your stomach. You just get used to being full while you run, so you focus less on it. You find food options that work better for you. And then also, if you are training to run anything over mid-distance being like a marathon, I know, isn't that offensive? If you're training for anything over mid-distance or mid-distance, marathon up, like, the more often you can train in any longer duration events using the same fueling strategy you're going to use on race day, better. Only because you're introducing nutrients to your body during activity, and as your body is creating energy, using energy, and pulling from stores, things that you've got stored in your muscles, you can become better at utilizing carbohydrates and glycogen for fuel on like the mitochondrial level by doing more activity and by taking in those carbohydrates during that activity. So that is another reason why I often caution against going fat adapted. Fat adapted doesn't make you better at using fats. It makes you worse at using carbs. Because you're not taking in carbs anymore, or carbs around exercise, and your body cannot utilize them and they are not present, your body just gets shit at using them. Those pathways become less efficient. On a cellular level, your body is no longer adapted to using carbohydrates for fuel. So if you're training for a race where you're going to need to be using fuel during said race, not only are we thinking mechanically, like gastrointestinally, but you also want to be taking in fuel during your run, even if it's shorter, as long as it's, an hour or over an hour. Train fed. If you are going to race fed, train fed. Train fed as often as possible. I know that people like to run fasted in the morning because it's more comfortable, but if you are going to race fed, train fed. And again, if you've eaten, 8 to 10 to 12 hours before, there's probably still food in your small intestine. So you're not truly fasted anyway. There's nothing in your stomach. But there's a bunch of stuff in your small intestine. Things are complicated, guys. But train fed as often as possible if you plan on racing fed. Become used to it. Let your body adapt to it. Psychologically, let yourself adapt to it. There's no reason to do an event longer than a half marathon fasted. I would argue there's no reason to do a half marathon fasted unless you medically have to. You're just going to feel better. Train fed as often as possible. The other thing that I like to talk about as well is if you are doing anything like powerlifting meet or a CrossFit competition or an all-day competition where there's multiple events across a whole day, practice doing multiple workouts on weekends. Practice doing workouts hours away from one another. Practice eating after each workout. Find out what works and what sits well. Find out portions that sit well and practice that nutritional approach. I've seen so many excellent athletes bonk out because they were so terrified to eat during the workouts, but were waiting, hours between them, that they managed to hit low blood sugar and low glycogen because they'd only eaten 600 calories for the whole day, but they were on workout 3 of a pretty strenuous, high intensity day. So it doesn't just matter with endurance exercise, but practice your race day or event day nutrition and the problems you will face. practice those as often as possible. I would honestly say even things like people who compete in horse showing. I actually had a woman who showed her horses. She had 3 of them. And sometimes she was like, I won't even eat because I'll forget. We handled her nutrition just as if she was like a CrossFit athlete. And she started winning things. So, even if you're not doing a physical event, still try to play by those same rules and practice them and implement them as often as possible. You will feel much better fed than you're going to by trying to have an empty stomach the whole time. This also happens a lot with Ragnars, I've found, especially when you have an 8-person team and on a 4-person team. That you end up waiting hours and hours and hours and hours between your runs. And you gotta eat, bro. You gotta eat. So practice eating. Figure out what the specific hurdles you will face on your event day, lead up to the event will be, and just practice those. Practice those as often as possible. If you're going to be sleep deprived, practice running sleep deprived. There's benefits to it. Not that you have to do it all the time, not that you have to do it every single training session, but I personally feel that waiting until race day to implement a strategy may mean that you're using the wrong strategy the entire time. And you have no idea because you practice it 3 times a year. What if there was a better way? You have no idea. So practice, practice, practice. That would be my recommendation. This has been a lot of blabbing on my part. I think I've answered most of the questions that I got. All I can stress really is just understand that recovery comes before hypertrophy. Your body's not going to build new expensive ass muscle if it can't recover from what you've already done. And you need food. You need it. If you're healthy and you don't have diabetes, you process sugar just fine. Spikes in glucose, blood glucose after a meal are absolutely normal. They're not something to be running away from or trying to control. They're very normal. Of course, they're happening. And carbs are not the enemy. Fat's not the enemy. Protein's not the enemy. If you have any kind of health condition that makes a certain food or macronutrient worse for you than others, obviously follow the doctor's advice. But for most of us that fall under the healthy, normal umbrella, if someone is trying to sell you an idea or a concept about something being bad for you, or eating at a certain time being bad for you, or something being bad, and they're using that to sell you something, even if it's just their intellectual property, their book, their ideals, question it, look it up. A lot of the times the studies that they're cherry picking from are done on sick people. They're done on sick populations. Sometimes the studies that they cherry pick from literally prove the opposite. They just read them wrong. So really make sure that if you hear something that sounds too good to be true or too bad to be reasonable, both are probably true. Question it. As always, we're here to help. If you have any questions, we will do our best. And the more specific you can be with your questions, the better. I'm not going to tell you what I think about so-and-so, a person, a dietary leader, figure, something like that, because I don't know what to talk about that they talk about. I don't know what you're interested in. I'm most certainly not going to research their entire body of work just to give a 2-sentence answer. So if you have a specific answer about something that they've said, or a specific question, I will give you a much more specific answer because I can research it specifically and give you the information that you're looking for. I think in a lot of cases, people aren't necessarily wrong. Sometimes what they say is technically true, but within the larger picture of working with actual human beings, we're very complex creatures. Psychosocial model is more often where I try to approach things from. It may be irrelevant. It may be statistically relevant, but clinically irrelevant. more often than not, honestly. And make sure that you're not trying to implement the nutritional interventions of a sport that isn't yours, or a person who doesn't have the same lifestyle as yours, or a person that doesn't have the same life environment as yours. And if that person is you 10 years ago, that still counts. Yeah, please reach out if you guys have any questions. Thanks for listening through this whole babble. And if there's anything that I said that didn't make sense or that you'd like clarification on, or that you feel was untrue, awesome. Please let me know. And I'd love to either explain it better, break it down further, or give you guys a new resource. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll have a guest for you next. Bye.